Who are some dark horses in Mets camp right now that could make the roster come opening day? I'll break down a few on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X, Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Before we get into the dark horse candidates to make the Mets roster come opening day, we have to talk about a non-dark horse roster, a team that is status quo. So what should be the expected roster come opening day? You all know the names, but let's run through them. Opening day lineup: Brandon Nimmo in left field. I got Starling Marte in right field batting second. Hot take, maybe? I don't know. I think that top four of Nimmo, Marte, Lindor, and Alonso did pretty good in 2022, and I would not be surprised if the Mets just ran that back. So, of course, that would have Lindor at short, Alonso at first. Got Jeff McNeil batting fifth, not necessarily the protection that you'd want for Pete Alonso, but that's sort of how I see the lineup shaking up right now. Sixth, Francisco Alvarez at catcher. Seventh, Brett Beatty at third base. Eighth, Mark Vientos at DH. And ninth, Harrison Bader playing center field. So that's 9 men on a 26-man roster. Starting rotation: Jose Quintana. I think he's the opening day starter. I could be wrong, but I imagine him being the one returning arm along with Tyler McGill that has the experience. I think he'll get the ball. Luis Severino as the 2 right now, Sean Manaea as the 3, Tyler McGill as the 4, and Adrian Hauser as the 5. Now we're up to 14 out of a 26-man roster. The bench: Omar Narvaez, Joey Wendell, Tyrone Taylor, and DJ Stewart. Now, here's where you could start to see a dark horse make the team. For one, is DJ Stewart going to make the roster? I think that is a roster spot that is certainly up for grabs. They can assign DJ Stewart to AAA. They don't have to put him on the roster, whereas someone like Joey Wendell, Tyrone Taylor, there's no options there. So those guys are pretty locked in, as well as Omar Narvaez. Stewart is the one guy that certainly has a spot up for grabs. Also, injury. So far in camp, Jeff McNeil, Joey Wendell, they have not appeared in a spring training game. At this juncture, the Mets aren't too worried about either player, but you never know if a setback could happen or if one of them just can't get on the field in time by opening day, in which case you might have another spot open. So when you look at some dark horse candidates when it comes to the position players, which we're going to do in the final segment, we're going to skew mostly infielders. But again, there's still that DJ Stewart spot that could be up for grabs. Now, the starting rotation, barring injury, I think it's going to be a 5-man rotation. There's been some talk about could the Mets go to a 6-man rotation. I think at some point this season we could see that. If these 5 guys go into the season and they're pitching well and they're taking their turns every 5th day early on, and Kodai Senga is healthy, ready to go, I think he could just slide into what would become a 6-man rotation. The reason I believe it might not start as a 6-man rotation is because the Mets have 5 off days in their first 25 games. So there's enough baked in rest there that I don't think you have to put a Jose Butto or a Joey Lucchesi on the roster, and both of those guys have an option. So you can start them out in AAA, have them stretched out, ready to go. As soon as one of those other 5 gets hurt or just isn't performing, you can always make a change if you need to. So I right now don't expect Lucchesi or Butto to make the team. I would categorize them as dark horses, but unless there's an injury, I do not see that happening. Now, we get to the bullpen, and this is where there's the most competition in camp. Anthony Tacoma had a great article go up for MLB.com today where he was breaking down the Mets bullpen options, how they brought in 14 arms this offseason, how they had, I think he said, 8 returning, and you have the minor league guys in camp as well. The bottom line is you got Baker's dozen at least relievers right now that are competing for maybe 2 spots in that bullpen. And in the article, DeComo listed the same 6 guys that I've been talking about on the show as near locks to be on the team come opening day, which of course is Edwin Diaz, Adam Ottavino, Brooks Raley, Jake Diekman, Drew Smith, and Jorge Lopez, all guys on major league deals, guaranteed salaries. And then you could look at those other 2 spots. And I think in the article, who did he put? I think he put Johan Ramirez and Michael Tonkin as his projected guys to be in that bullpen. For me, when I'm looking at what I'd categorize as a dark horse, the 2 guys that I would say don't fall into that category at all, it's Shintaro Fujinami and Michael Tonkin. And the reason why I list those 2 guys is because they signed the biggest contracts of this whole crop this offseason. Fujinami was it over $3 million, was it $3.5 million, although he did have a minor league option put into that contract. So the Mets can option him down, which DeComo in the article said is something the Mets might want to take advantage of. And look, Anthony's in camp. He's talking to a lot of people. There might be some credence to that maybe the Mets are thinking, hey, Fuji's got a late start to camp anyway. Put him down at AAA, let him work on some things, and he could be a real weapon later on. I don't think that's a bad strategy whatsoever, but I would not call him a dark horse to make the team when he's got great stuff and he signed a fairly significant contract, especially when you put it against what he did last season when it comes to the ERA. Michael Tonkin signed a split contract. Now, in the article, DeComo said he's out of options. So it doesn't make sense to me because when he signed the contract, it was a split deal. So to me, that means he can be assigned to the minor leagues. Regardless of split deal or not, had a lot of time in the Braves bullpen last year. So I think to call him a dark horse isn't necessarily the right categorization. But there's a lot of other relievers that could push one of those 2 guys out or both of those guys out come the opening day roster here. Obviously, injury can also open up a spot if one of those kind of guaranteed 6 gets hurt. For now, everyone seems to be healthy. So we're going to be going through today as we're looking at dark horse candidates. It's a couple of relievers that could potentially grab some spots at the back of that bullpen, or I shouldn't say the back of the bullpen as far as guys that are pitching at the end of games, but at the bottom of the bullpen maybe. And then it's that last spot or 2 on the bench who could maybe sneak on the roster there. So we're going to go through pitchers first, then hitters. Before we get to that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs as well as their Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides you access to millions of movies and TV episodes as well as free and live TV. What I love about the Fire Stick is I can have it in my living room, and then when I go on a trip, I can unplug it, take it with me, put it into the TV in the hotel room, and all of a sudden, I got all my shows and everything available for me there. And Fire TV also recently added the Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep you up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Let's talk relief pitchers. We're going to begin with a couple of guys that are on the 40-man roster who have no options left. So in some respects, that does not make them a dark horse candidate because they have a leg up on a lot of the competition. These guys on minor league deals, very easy to just keep them in-house. Stash them in Syracuse, see who's throwing the ball well. Eventually, they're going to be called on. I mean, all 4 of these names I'm going to discuss in this segment, I think will pitch innings for the New York Mets this year in some capacity. I almost feel like the latter 2 are more likely to because either they will break camp or at some point they'll be called on. I guess there's a better chance that you don't see Johan Ramirez or Sean Reed-Foley in a Mets uniform during the season because maybe they don't make the team and then they don't make it through waivers. So I don't know if I call Johan or Sean Reed-Foley as a dark horse, but they're definitely names to mention in this exercise. For Ramirez, you're looking at a guy that averaged 95 miles per hour on his fastball last year. He's consistently touching 97 in camp, maybe added, a tick on that fastball. He throws harder than a lot of the guys that are vying for a spot, so that does give him a little bit of a leg up. And he pitched nearly 40 innings in the big leagues last year. It was 38 and a third between the Pirates and the White Sox, more predominantly with the Pirates. I think it was only 4 innings with the White Sox where he didn't pitch well. Overall, though, you combine it, a 4.23 ERA and 38 and a third last season. That's not a bad ERA for a guy that throws hard. I think he's 28 years old, no options. He's got a good chance of making this team. So again, not necessarily a dark horse, but I wanted to mention him. Sean Reed-Foley is another one. Been in the Mets organization for some time now. He pitched 7 2/3 with the big league club last year. This was coming off Tommy John surgery, rehabbed, went through a bunch of stops in the minors, had his largest stint with Syracuse, gets up and ends up pitching pretty well. He struck out 16 batters in that 7 2/3 innings pitched last year. Now he has 6 strikeouts and 3 innings in camp. So I look at Sean Reed-Foley, and again, less of a dark horse, more of a name to sort of watch that he might make this team as a guy that probably would not be able to stay in the organization if they're not going to put him in that opening day bullpen. But this is an episode about dark horses. So I want to talk about 2 guys that I think should make this team in some respects and guys that we're going to see this year at some point, even if it's not on opening day. Austin Adams is the first one. I talked about Austin Adams a lot earlier in this offseason. If any of you listeners have been tuning in for a while now, remember I talked about the relief pitcher that almost exclusively throws sliders? That's Austin Adams. So far in spring, 3 scoreless innings, 5 strikeouts, 1 hit allowed. He hit a batter. He walked a batter. But again, no earned runs. For his career in the big leagues, a 4.17 ERA. He has 170 strikeouts and 114 and a third innings pitched in the big leagues. That's a strikeout rate of 33.1%. So in his big league career, he struck out about 1 in every 3 batters he faces, which is really good. Now, last year, the stats weren't great. 17 and a third innings pitched in 24 appearances. So that alone is a red flag. When you see the innings pitched drastically less than the amount of appearances, might have had a short hook in some outings, especially when you pair it with the 5.71 ERA. That was with the Diamondbacks, although his expected ERA, which is probably due to the strikeouts, was 3.55. So maybe had a little bit of bad luck, but overall, when you look at the larger picture of his big league career for a guy that's 32 years old, career ERA in the low 4s, that's not bad. And the strikeouts really do jump off the page. So he's in an interesting spot. It's a minor league deal. I think it's probably safest for the Mets to put him in Syracuse. Hold on to him. Hold on to these other guys that I already talked about and just keep things status quo at the start of the year and just see if the early results in spring continue to translate in Syracuse. And if they do, you got a really nice reliever you can call up who has some big league experience. But the Mets also might just be looking at their bullpen and they, in spirit of an open competition, might assemble the best 8 guys in camp, or at least for these last 2 spots, let it be spirit of the competition and let the best arm who shines the most grab a spot. And I would say up to this point, the most impressive arms based on spring results, it's Sean Reed-Foley and Austin Adams. I think those are the guys whose numbers stand out the most. And then the other one is Nate Lavender, who's our ultimate dark horse to make this team. I think he's the guy that's got a real fan following right now after his first 2 perfect spring appearances, no hits allowed, no walks. Fans are really pulling for him to make this team, especially after that awesome quote he had about throwing 92 with intent and will behind it, not being scared of his stuff in the zone. He's just a really fun name to monitor throughout this season, really. He was drafted in the 14th round by the Mets in 2021. That year, he pitched at the complex, threw the ball really well. In 2022, he starts out in low A, had a 0.48 ERA and 18 2/3 innings pitched with 30 strikeouts and just 1 earned run. Moved up to high A where he pitched to a 2.48 ERA in 29 innings, struck out 37 during that span. So again, big strikeout rates, low ERAs. Last year, he started the year in Double-A, dominated a 1.74 ERA in 10 and a third innings pitched, had 19 strikeouts to just 3 walks, gets a call up to Triple-A where he made 35 appearances, pitched 44 innings, had a 3.27 ERA, and that was a very tough league to pitch in last year. He had 67 strikeouts in those 44 innings. In the minor leagues altogether, his walk rate's generally around 12%, strikeout rates usually well over 30%. He strikes out a lot of batters. And the question's going to be the walks, of course. He's got to get those down. And I think that is an area of development where the New York Mets can certainly look at Lavender and say, hey, go to Syracuse, work on some things. And at some point this season, either when they need a lefty or not, because he doesn't really have splits that just favor left-handed batters. I mean, he's able to get anyone out. But they can still put him in the minor leagues for a little bit longer and wait till they need an arm, and then they can call on him. But again, so far in spring, 2 perfect innings, 4 strikeouts. He's looked really good, and I would love to see him make this team out of camp. He hasn't gotten as many appearances, though, as Yohan Ramirez, Austin Adams, or Sean Reed-Foley. All those guys are up to 3 appearances. That's not to say that Nate Lavender, just because he only has 2, is not in the mix. But as we are getting to the point here where a game got rained out on Wednesday, but you're starting to see less and less opportunities to see guys. The pitchers that they're really putting into these spring games are the ones that are really auditioning. I would not be surprised at all if Lavender was involved in the next cuts or the following ones after that, just because there's other arms that, again, you can lose. And I think the Mets will probably prioritize depth. That's why I would imagine, especially, again, go back to the beginning of the conversation with Michael Tonkin, in my eyes, from what a split contract is supposed to mean, should be able to be sent down. Again, Anthony Tacoma's out of options, so I don't want to say that 100% confidently because he might know something I don't. But from my understanding, when they signed him, Tonkin and Fujinami could be in Syracuse. And with that, if you're just strictly prioritizing depth and Yohan Ramirez and Sean Reed-Foley pitch well, those are 2 guys that I would think end up at the top of this pecking order. But Adams and Lavender are some dark horses to watch throughout the season, but particularly if they keep getting opportunities this spring and they're shoving, maybe David Stearns and company says, you know what? We need this bullpen to be a strength of this team early on, and they might go with those guys. One last note on Lavender and Adams. Sometimes jersey number can tell you a lot as far as expectations heading into camp. Adams has number 54 right now. Nate Lavender is wearing number 94. So again, Nate Lavender is the ultimate dark horse. But hey, if they keep giving him some opportunities and he's not giving up any hits, at some point, the front office might have to take notice. Regardless, I want to talk about some bats that could find their way onto the roster if they can stay hot this spring. We'll go through position players in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Testing your skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, where you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps, because it's daily fantasy sports made easy, where you pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. During the season, you could pick more on Pete Alonso home runs if they're going up against the Braves. Let's say Spencer Strider's on the mound, you can pick more on his strikeouts. Combine the two and try to win big. Right now, you can also look at MLB season stats by finding the MLB season tab. That's MLBSZN. And there you can find RBI stats for the season, where Pete Alonso is listed at 108.5, Matt Olson 109.5, and Juan Soto at 103.5. I think all 3 of those guys are going to put up a lot of RBIs, take more on all of them, and you can combine them to win big. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you subscribe to be a Locked On Mets insider, to be plugged into everything we got going on throughout the regular season. This is where you can ask me questions anytime through our texting service, where I can send you updates anytime. It's also where we'll be sending the lineups each game throughout the season. So you get the starting 9 texted directly to your phone. That's where we're going to run our Locked On Mets giveaways. So if you want to be part of any of that bonus coverage, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Let's now go over the position players. And we begin with a guy that, again, you might not qualify as a dark horse because he is on the 40-man roster and he's out of options. But I would be surprised if he made the team, and that makes him somewhat of a dark horse. And I'm talking about Zack Short. He's played 179 big league games. He's a career 179 hitter, but 112 of those games came last year, and he fared a little bit better offensively. Not great, but for a defensive first utility player, the stats aren't too bad. He hit 204, 292 on base, 339 slug, 7 home runs, 5 stolen bases. He walked at 11% clip. That's pretty solid. He struck out a little over a 26% clip. Not as good. His weighted runs created plus, which is a stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100, was 76. So 24% worse than your league average hitter. But he plays a ton of positions. A really good infield at second, third, and short. He also got into center field and right field last year. He even pitched 6 innings. And funny enough, through his first 5 outings, he allowed only 1 run. So his ERA was like 1.28 through 5 outings. Then he gave up 3 runs to the Astros in his final appearance in mop-up duty for the Tigers. But so far this spring, he's got a couple of doubles. He's 3 for 12. He stole a base. If Joey Wendell is hurt or Jeff McNeil is hurt, Zack Short would be the favorite to make the team, which, again, doesn't necessarily make him a dark horse, but it's a name to monitor because everybody else we're talking about are non-roster guys. So these other players would have to bump Zack Short amongst others to grab one of those final bench spots. And we begin with another infielder, Ryland Bannon. He's 27 years old, only has 7 big league games under his belt. Last year, he spent the season in AAA with Houston, where he batted .241 with a .360 on base, a .449 slug, had 18 home runs, 12 stolen bases. He walked 15.4% of the time, only struck out 22.1% of the time. So that shows you some pretty good discipline. Again, with the home runs and the stolen bases, a little bit of everything when it comes to the toolkit that he's got. He can play second base and third base. Not sure if he's had any experience. Well, I know he hasn't had any experience out in the outfield in his minor league career. It's mostly been in the infield. But I don't know if he's got any work on the backfields, trying to catch some fly balls to give him even more versatility to potentially make this team. But what makes Bannon interesting to me, outside of pretty decent numbers, like I said, in AAA last year, it's the fact that he was one with the Astros organization, which is one of the more analytically driven and smarter franchises in baseball. And then in 2022, he ended up with the Braves. He was claimed off waivers there. So again, just good teams that have picked him up. It makes me look at a player with kind of a second glance of, all right, maybe there's something here. Again, he's only 27, so he could be almost similar to DJ Stewart in the sense of a guy that might figure it out finally and a little bit further on in his career with the Mets. Stewart, though, would be potentially a guy that would lose his roster spot to someone like Bannon on opening day. He'd have to just keep hitting the ball really well. I think there'd have to be, for one, Joey Wendell going down and the Mets wanting another infielder who has some more potential with the bat. And 2, I think if they were really concerned about Brett Beatty as far as just being able to hit left-handed pitching, and they were also concerned about Mark Vientos being able to play the position at third base, Bannon would be an ideal platoon partner to start against lefties and be your third baseman in those scenarios. Joey Wendell, also bats left-handed. So that would be an option, I would say. He's 4 for 11 in camp so far with a walk, couple doubles. So we'll see. We'll see how he hits. I like Bannon a lot more than the other infielders in camp, though. I'll say that. I like the bat potential a lot more than Jose Iglesias and Yolmer Sanchez, who are more defensive-minded guys. And I honestly might even like the bat a little bit more than Short. I think Short is more ready to be at the end of a bench. He's done it before, plays a lot of positions. He's on the roster. If Joey Wendell is going to start the year on the 10-day IL, I think the Mets will just make it easy on themselves and put Zack Short on the roster to start the season. And then when Wendell is ready, they probably try to pass Short through waivers. I think that's what is more likely to happen. but Bannon could hit his way on the roster. And if not now, I think at some point this year, we're going to see at least a cameo from Ryland Bannon. Now, I saved the absolute best for last here. The dark horse that is making the best case right now to make the team come opening day, and that's Trayce Thompson. He's 5 for 10 so far, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts, 2 home runs, and a double. So great numbers in early spring. And he's been around. 369 MLB games under his belt, 32 years old. He made his debut back in 2015, burst onto the scene. It helps, of course, when your brother is a Hall of Famer in another sport to get that name out there. But he did it himself, too, with his play. Hit 295 with the White Sox, 363 on base, 533 slug, a 146 WRC plus, so 46% better than your league average hitter in 44 games. After the season, he was traded to the Dodgers in a 3-team deal that sent Todd Frazier to the White Sox. Frankie Montes also went from the White Sox to the Dodgers in that trade. And then he had an average season in 2016. Played 80 games with the big league club, hit 13 home runs, batted .225, 302 on base, 436 slug, exactly even at 100 WRC plus, so a league average hitter. Then things really derailed for him in his career. Terrible 27-game stint in 2017, even worse in 2018, well below the Mendoza line both of those years. Didn't play any game in 2019 or 2020. Finally made it back to the big leagues in 2021. Had 15 great games with the Cubs where he homered 4 times, had really good numbers. 2022, started the year with the White Sox, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't take that part of my notes, but I'm pretty positive it was. And then he ended up with the Dodgers, and that's where he had his best run of success lately. Hit 268, 364 on base, 537 slug, had 13 home runs in 74 games, a 153 WRC plus, 53% better than your league average hitter. But with that said, he's still in that season struck out 36% of the time. He has a career strikeout rate of 32.7%. And last year, he struck out 43% of the time. So why he was available on a minor league deal. He's not a guy that crushes lefties as a right-handed batter. It's actually the opposite. He has reverse splits throughout his career. 739 OPS, which again is on base plus slugging. That's against right-handed pitchers, Against lefties, a 664 OPS. So much better against righties than left. We'll see if that's something he has fixed. It's been an area of focus for him. But overall, he's just a guy that can hit his way onto the roster. If the Mets aren't seeing much from DJ Stewart, from Tyrone Taylor even, not that they're going to take Taylor off the roster. I think he's going to be on the team with the defense alone. But Thompson could be a guy that decide, you know what? He's hit really well. Let's put him onto the team and they find another way to clear a roster spot, whether that's a pitcher or someone else. DJ Stewart starts the year in Syracuse, and Thompson actually makes the club. I think there's a chance it happens. He could take some DH at bats. He could also play all 3 spots in the outfield if they need him to, where you can get Starling Marte off his feet or Brandon Nimmo off his feet, and just kind of mix and match throughout the early part of the season. I think of all the names we mentioned today, the 2 that I think are most likely to break camp as dark horses, and again, the 4 I'd sort of categorize as real dark horses. It's Austin Adams, Nate Lavender on the pitching side, and then Trayce Thompson and Ryland Bannon on the hitter side. I would say that Austin Adams for a pitcher and Trayce Thompson for a hitter would be 2 guys that have really shown out a little bit early on in camp. And if they can keep it up for 3 more weeks, they might just force the Mets' hand and find their way on the opening day roster. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you who tuned in. We're going to do predictions on tomorrow's show, but a little bit of a fun twist to it because it is a Friday farm report. What I'm going to do is top predictions for the Mets farm system this season or for their top prospects. So I'm going to come up with a list of different predictions of what guys might end up doing this year. It should be a lot of fun. When we get closer to the season, I'll do a prediction show, of course, on the MLB team, but I want to get a little more clarity on what the roster is looking like and what we've seen in spring to try to make some more educated predictions, if you will. If you want to miss out on any of these upcoming episodes before we get to the start of the season and you're listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Still appreciate all of you for helping us reach that goal of 8,000 subs by opening day. It's 3 weeks. I don't know if we can get there, but if we got to 8,500 subs, I would be blown away. So I appreciate all of you who are hitting that subscribe button. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do so on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube to the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Of course, I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You'll find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.